Hi. It's my starting phrase these days, just hi. Did you all manage to get lunch? The queue is apparently, down to the M4. So we might have to think about that tomorrow. So thank you for getting lunch. Thank you for being here. We're ready for the afternoon session. We've shifted now from artificial intelligence, large language models, machine learning and all of that to the world of cybersecurity. Pete Burnap, Cardiff University. He's the director for the Cardiff Centre for Cybersecurity Research. Airbus? It just says Airbus there. It's like a word on its own.
All the things.
Is it all the things cyber? So then I should say Airbus Centre of Excellence. That's what it is. It's my ability to read is the problem. Airbus Centre of Excellence in Cybersecurity Analytics, Wales Cyber Innovation Hub, and the co-director of the Digital Transformation Institute, DTII. I mean, Pete knows his stuff, everyone, and is heavily involved in helping Wales to fly the cybersecurity flag. So we're delighted that he is going to chair this entire session. Pete, thank you very much.
Thank you, Aled. Thank you. Afternoon. I think really what that says is I don't know how to say no to things, which is possibly why I'm on the stage again today as well. So welcome back. So I'm Pete Burnap. I'm a professor of data science and cybersecurity at Cardiff University, and I'm also the director of the Cyber Innovation Hub, which is the sponsor of this session. And I've got to say, I'm absolutely delighted to host a session on From Crisis to Opportunity, how cyber technology, I think we should say, and process can help us bounce back stronger. We've got a stellar panel today for you. We've got an overview and some thoughts from Sarah Armstrong-Smith, who's the Chief Security Advisor for Microsoft. Absolutely delighted to be joined by His Excellency, the Honourable Stephen Smith, the Australian High Commissioner. Welcome. The CISO for National Highways, Philomena Lavery, and the VP of Operations International, Thales, Tony Burton. So a genuine international perspective, I think, on what is an international problem. So the format of the session will be Sarah's going to share her thoughts for about 20 minutes. I'll then ask the panel members for their thoughts on reactions to the talk, but generally just to give you some thoughts on their thinking around cyber opportunity and how they're thinking from their various different perspectives. And then if we've got time, we'll come to you and ask for your questions. So without further ado, I'll welcome to the stage Sarah Armstrong-Smith, Chief Security Advisor for Microsoft.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to be with you all today. So a little bit about me. I'm Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. So what's one of those? My role, in essence, is to liaise with Microsoft's largest enterprise customers across Europe. So I'm multi-sector, multi-country, talking to CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, and it's really to understand the challenges when it comes to digital transformation, cloud adoption, but really why we're here is cybersecurity. Now, I'm going to be sharing some insights from Microsoft in particular. We're going to be looking back over the last year and really kind of sharing what's going on when it comes to cybercrime, nation-sponsored actors, but also what do we do about it. But two things I want you to remember. First of all, I want you to just think about hyperscale. So when I talk about the level of intelligence that Microsoft collects, you can kind of only do that if you're kind of big tech. The other one is context. So I'm going to be sharing numbers. I'm going to be sharing some stats. Every single one of those has already been surpassed. So I want to kind of think about it as a point in time with some of the things that I'm going to be sharing. So to kick things off, every single day, Microsoft collects, processes, and analyzes over 65 trillion telemetry signals. Now that sounds like a big number. If I told you I joined Microsoft 3 years ago, that was 6.5 trillion. So in 3 years, 10 times the number of telemetry signals. That probably equates to about 500 petabytes of data. Now again, that sounds like a big number. If I told you that's about 10 times the entirety of all data collected by NASA, and that's every single day, just to kind of put it into context. So I'm just going to be kind of talking about the state of cybercrime in particular. So we've seen a real uptake in the amount of aggressive cyber criminals, sophistication when we talk about nation states. But I'm also going to share with you some good news about what we can do and how we're going to collaborate. Just put it into context. When we say cybercrime, crime doesn't pay, it actually does. And there's a reason why the cyber criminals are investing so much money. Now, if cybercrime was a country, it would actually be the third biggest nation in the world. So we have USA, China, cybercrime. If you're wondering where the UK is, it'll be about 7 or 8 on that list. It would also be the largest and fastest growing economy in the world. So when we're kind of talking about the scope and scale of some of these things, you can really see what it is we're talking about. But I'm going to kind of give you some insights on identity. So when we talk about you really shouldn't be reusing passwords, there's a reason behind that. So we are blocking approximately 4,000 identity brute force attacks every second. That equates to 120,000 a minute. So when we're talking about just the kind of scope and scale, what you can kind of see there is at one point we were actually going as far as 11,000 attacks a second. So this is really just to be a cyber criminal, getting your password, basically seeing how many other doors it opened. So we kind of tell people to utilize multi-factor authentication, not just to rely on your password, but the attackers are getting wise to that as well. So they're spoofing, pretending to be your bank. So you're thinking about a one-time passcode, you'll get a fake one of those, and you'll also do what we call MFA fatigue or bypass test. So they're spamming you, trying to make sure that at one point, when you keep getting multiple requests over and over again, at some point you're just going to press a button. And that's really how easy it is. 6,000 attempts a day just to try and get that MFA bypass. I want to talk a little bit about ransomware, the most operationally impacting cybercrime of all. So we've seen a 200% increase in human-operated ransomware. So this is an actual person behind the attack. But we're seeing their motivation changing and what they're doing and how they're doing it. In particular, rather than just encrypting systems, they're now exfiltrating data and trying to extort on that as well. But what might be surprising, the vast majority of companies being targeted by ransomware are not big enterprises. They're the ones you see on the media, but actually it's small enterprises. And the average amount of an extortion demand is approximately 300,000 euros. So you can kind of see kind of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Good news, if you actually have deployed proper security, and I'll come in, what does proper security mean? The chances of them able to actually successfully extort a company is less than 2%. So if you're identifying or catching them, you're able to defend against those attacks. You really are able to kind of take it to the next level. Now, business email compromise is the most financially impacting cybercrime of all. And this is really what we call a second stage attack, where the attacker has already got access into your email. Their whole game plan is to build trust into that environment. And they're learning about you, they're learning about your mannerisms. So do you sign your email Bob or Robert? Are you very authoritarian? Do you just kind of give an order? Or are you quite nice about it? Are you very pleased? And really what they're trying to do is understand your business to business and business to consumer relationships. And we're tracking 156,000 attempts every single day. And really what they're trying to do is look for that opportune moment for them to intercept a legitimate message, be able to have a invoice swapped out, a bank account swapped out, and really kind of doing all of those things. But they're really taking their time in what they're doing. So we've seen a huge increase in DDoS attacks. So this is someone hammering the network in essence. 1,700 attempts a day. But we're seeing a big increase in botnets being purchased at scale and very precision attacks in terms of contacting multiple different entities, different sectors. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the nation-sponsored actors in particular and how they're evolving at scale. But there's two aspects to it. It's the offensive cyber attacks, but also the influence operations. So kind of what are we seeing really? Well, we've seen 120 different countries in the last year being actively targeted. And the one that kind of always at the top of the list, doesn't matter who the threat actor is, by the way, USA. UK normally comes in the sort of top 3 or 5, but Ukraine obviously has gone #1 because of the war in Ukraine, USA and Israel in particular, which I will come back to. But what we have seen in particular is a growing focus on critical infrastructure. And it may surprise you that the most attacked sector month on month, it's not financial services if you were wondering, it's actually education. Education almost kind of blows every other sector out of the water. Why education in particular? So you think about schools, you think about the low level of security. Some people are probably utilizing their parents' devices. When we talk about those password sprays in particular, brute force attacks, that in essence is where they're getting it from, seeing how many doors it opens. But from an espionage perspective, we have some of the most elite universities in the world. So some of those attackers are trying to get access to high-value research, science, medicine, big tech in particular. So real critical infrastructure and kind of what are they doing is really kind of core. So we have to kind of think of global supply chains, how we're all interconnected. So irrespective of the fact that we're in the UK, we really has a ripple effect across the globe when we see some of these things. But as I sort of said, they're not just focused on physical cyber attacks. We've seen a huge increase in disinformation campaigns, propaganda in particular. And it's all designed to really kind of throw people off with kind of like how they're targeting different people in different nations with this level of propaganda. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So I'm going to talk about the big 4 in particular, but I want you to be cognizant about the fact that every single nation has some kind of offensive cyber capability. So when I'm talking about the big 4, they're not the only big 4. But we think about Russia in particular, who they're targeting and why they're targeting. So it wouldn't surprise you that in the last year, they've been heavily targeting Ukraine in particular. Now, what we identified is Russian intelligence actually created 7 brand new strains of destructive and wiper malware and 2 brand new strains of ransomware. And they really went hard and fast in the first 4 months. We saw more attacks in the first 4 months of the war in Ukraine in the previous 8 years. But what they weren't counting on was the level of support that the Ukraine had from other governments, intelligence agencies, and big tech that came in to support them. So actually it didn't work. The level of destructive attacks that they thought were going to wipe out most of Ukraine's critical infrastructure didn't really have the desired effect. So they went backwards into espionage, really kind of targeting NATO, Western allies, and they're really stoking up that cyber influence operations in particular, to really trying to bring back that kind of anti-war sentiment, particularly when we're thinking about which countries are looking after some of the Ukrainian refugees. Now, we think about China in particular, heavily targeting South China Sea, Taiwan, some of those countries in particular. Heavy targeting of US defense. Even Microsoft itself has been targeted in the last couple of months. In particular, they were trying to get a backdoor through Microsoft into US and UK defense and targeting some very specific individuals in those organizations. So highly targeted, highly precision. But they're also quite happy to attack their partners as well. Whoever they are kind of working in liaison with, they are not against kind of targeting some of those in particular. So defense, education, high research is kind of one of the key areas they're looking for. And we look at Iran in particular, you kind of see 2 stories there. They're kind of the first half heavily targeting US. And so remember, I said the US always kind of come top. Knowing what we know now with regards to Hamas attacking Israel, you can see the second half of the year really focusing on attacking Israel in particular. Now, Iran have a huge array of offensive cyber capability. Now, we kind of think about Russia and the kind of the level of attacks that I was talking about. So we are seeing a willingness for some of these actors to go from disruption to destruction in particular. And Iran are quite happy to show their hand, quite happy to show who they're attacking and why they're attacking. Now, if you think about Iran as well in the last year, there have been issues when it comes down to human rights, particularly with regards to how they've been treating women. And so they are kind of going after journalists, they're going after human rights activists as well at the same time. When I talked about that cyber influence operations, particularly what's coming out of Russia, they're actually propelling and amplifying some of the Russian propaganda, and they're propelling it in from Iran in particular. Now, North Korea, in particular, again, it won't surprise you, US is number one, always number one. But you can see South Korea, Japan, and others in particular. So really, North Korea, given the amount of sanctions that are in place on that country in particular, it's all about funding their regime. And part of their regime is military nuclear capability in particular. But they also don't care who knows about them and what they're doing. So you may have heard about the fact that they also try to steal cryptocurrency, they steal cash from banks, and again, it's all about funding what they're trying to do. They also don't care about who they're actively targeting. So even though they are allies of Russia and China, they will also be targeting them for more intelligence in particular. Now, as I said, I did want to talk a little bit about the war in Israel right now. And I just want to kind of show you some of the amount of time and effort that goes in to planning some of these attacks. Now, when we are actively targeting and tracking various different threat actors, we're probably tracking about 300 large-scale threat actors, ransomware operators, as well as nation states. When we have something called Storm, this is either a new actor or an actor that we can't 100% attribute to a specific actor. So it's kind of a new campaign. So we started seeing a huge amount of activity beginning of this year was coming from Gaza at Israel, in particular looking at some of the telecommunications, Israeli defense. So you can kind of see the build-up that's kind of going on there. The second kind of area that we really want to be talking about is the role of cyber mercenaries. So I want you to think about cyber weapons for hire. In essence, this is private sector companies building cyber weapons that were mainly being built and purchased by other governments. This is really very dangerous. One of the most prolific ones is a software called Pegasus, which is actually utilized as mass surveillance on their own citizens, in essence. So this is very, very dangerous for private sector companies to be building these kind of huge-scale weapons and then selling that on. So where are the opportunities? What should we be thinking about? Where in essence, we need to kind of think about the scale. And I talked right at the beginning about hyperscale. So no longer are we talking about, is the cloud secure? We've kind of gone past all of that. We're now talking about how do we utilize the power of the cloud to deliver security. When we're talking about this scale of intelligence, what we see and the visibility. So we're talking about zero trust principles, and again, that sounds like a buzzword. What is it? In essence, it's really simple. One is an assume compromise mindset. For the best will in the world, the best defense, the best technology, you still have to assume a threat actor has got access. But also then thinking about the principle of least privilege and also always constantly verifying at the same time. I'm going to talk about how we leverage some of those partnerships, and we're going to talk about this on the panel, as well, the importance of collaboration. I just want to give you an example from Microsoft's own digital crimes unit. So Microsoft fiercely protects our brand. So we have multiple threat actors pretending to be Microsoft, trying to elicit your credentials. We had a big issue many years ago with software piracy. So Cobalt Strike in particular is utilized by a lot of cyber actors to get a backdoor access. This is a legitimate software that is utilized by security penetration testers as a way of kind of getting through. So we collaborated with the company that actually makes Cobalt Strike, called Fortra. And what we were able to do is get core orders and be able to forcibly take down this infrastructure, take down multiple domains, multiple IP addresses. And so it had a really great effect. So we had a massive decrease of about 25% of what was being utilized in the US, and we're kind of following that across the world. So what should we be doing about it, really? Well, the foundations, people talk about security hygiene. I don't really like to call it hygiene per se, because it assumes that it's easy. And we know some of these things aren't easy, but actually the foundations are really critical and they really do work. So one of the things we've already talked about, multi-factor authentication, but we have said not all MFA is built the same. So we have to have some kind of physical interaction with that device. So we're not just getting spammed. So biometrics are really important. I've talked about zero trust principles already, but patching, bane of people's lives. We have Patch Tuesday every month. We've been doing it for years. But there's a reason why we have to kind of do all these things. And the last point there is protecting the data itself. So the value, why these cyber criminals, why these nation-sponsored actors are doing what they do is because they're after information. So we really have to think about how we protect that information. But what does the future look like? Where do we kind of go from here? Well, I wanted to kind of make the point that also, we always feel like we're on the back foot. We're in this perpetual cycle of cat and mouse game. And we're always the ones that have to react. The reality is the onus is on the cyber attacker to have to evolve first. So every time they show their hand, even with those new strains of wiper malware, destructive malware, ransomware strains, every time we see it, we block it, they have to then basically evolve their tactics. So really, as defenders, we have huge amount of opportunity and huge amount of ability to share, collaborate, and kind of do this at scale. And the real game changer really comes into AI, artificial intelligence. Now, AI is nothing new. So we sort of say Microsoft has been utilizing machine learning, data analytics for a very, very long time. The real game changer is what's happened in the last year, particularly when we think about generative AI, ChatGPT, the use of large language models. Now, you're thinking about some of these things is how do you teach this in plain English? So you ask a question, get a plain English answer back. The difference of what Microsoft is doing and other companies are doing from a security perspective, we're teaching it the language of security. So those 65 trillion signals I talked about, the ability for the large language model to actually learn all of that, all of the threat intelligence, all the actors, the campaigns. So when you see something that doesn't quite look right, and you will find this anomaly or something really odd, just ask the question. That's kind of where we're going to. And this is really the game changer. And this is really kind of what we want to talk about on the panel. Kind of have a reflection on some of the things we've just discussed. But really, where's the opportunity? Where do we go from here? And I think that's where I'd like to hand back now, Pete, to the panel to really kind of bring this to life.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I don't know anyone else, but I was terrified about halfway through. I'm glad it got a bit more hopeful towards the end. So the purpose of the panel now is I'm going to effectively ask each of the panel members to pose their thoughts and reflections on both the talk, but also their own perspective on the opportunities. Cybersecurity is scary. It needs to be scary because we need a response. People need to take it seriously. But what we're hearing from the end of Sarah's talk there is that there are ways in which we can be prepared. And so I'll ask the panel members to reflect on those. So I'll come to you first, Philomena, if you'd like to give an overview of yourself and your role, particularly around things like preparedness and the human factors and adoption of these kind of things. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Pete. I'm CISO of National Highways. My role is to support the business to design, develop and deliver the strategic road network. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are resilient. We've got lots of operational technology, some obviously enterprise technology. And one of the things that's really important in bringing it home is people do get very scared, and we saw the stats from Sarah, but it's also about amplifying what that means in the way of opportunity. And in the same way as security can create physical security, can create a safe space for countries to grow, businesses to grow, and for people to go about their business, so does the application of good cybersecurity. And we've seen with artificial intelligence, both on the cyber defense side, but also to help businesses adopt new ways of doing things. You know, it can make business processes faster. It can allow them to look at things in new ways. And then also, secondly, the really important part is that resilience. You know, what do you do when everything goes wrong? And we saw, you know, last year, the ultimate in resilience of Ukraine adapting to its situation. And what we look at is very much the human factors in resilience. So regardless of how many security controls we deploy, we really need people to understand the what if. And the way we do that is by looking and explaining to people what our critical systems are, then helping them understand how that links with other critical infrastructure. So for example, we carry 98% of goods by road, so therefore we can impact both healthcare, because we carry medicines, and the food industry. But as we electrify and use more and more electric vehicles, we're also dependent on the electricity grid as well. So what we do is we use the power of partnerships, and we work with our suppliers and our users to look at what if a particular scenario developed. And then by allowing people to walk through real life scenarios, they then start to understand why they need to deploy cybersecurity controls, and all partners then join in together and really make a difference, which is ultimately to allow businesses and economies to continue to thrive.
Fantastic. Thanks, Philomena. So moving to you, Tony. So obviously Thales are big in the IT space, and we've discussed a lot of the IT risk, but also in the operational technology space, which, you know, for the audience, you know, IT, your laptops, your mobile phones, etc. The security for that is very different to the security of devices that power nuclear power plants, energy systems, etc. And Thales have a space in both. So, Tony, your thoughts on sort of the link between the two risks?
So for me, there's been two things today that have really brought things home to me. One is just listening to you there, Sarah, and the threat landscape as it's evolving. But also then when you factor in the AI effect and the potential for bad as well as the potential for good from that, and what does that look like in the future, I think is going to be a very interesting, but I think ultimately a very challenging world for both the information technology and the operational technology side of things. But what I wanted to just really focus on was much more of the operational technology side of things, because that's really the stuff that makes things happen for us. So our whole critical national infrastructure is built on that. And you know, it's down to probably everybody in this room to understand how do we make all businesses more resilient in the face of these growing challenges and these evolving challenges. And what building resilience is it's not about just adding a load more cyber controls or increasing your monitoring systems, that sort of thing. Yes, that is part of it. But it's much more. It's about our supply chains. It's about the people in the organizations, picking up what you were just saying there. It's about having the requisite amount of skills to be able to deal with things when they do inevitably go wrong, because they will. You know, no amount of controls and protection is going to actually stop things from happening. So we have to look at how we respond and recover. And when you're talking about the particulars of operational technology, that's where it becomes really quite complex, because it's not a case of we can switch it off and on again. That's the last thing you want to be doing with a lot of the operational technology that's running our critical national infrastructure. So you have to understand fundamentally what you need to do. And I guess for me, the real challenge is that this operational technology world is in the perfect storm at the moment, because everybody will tell you about the fusion of IT and OT. Absolutely, it's happening. But for reasons of operational efficiency and effectiveness, we've increased the connectivity of operational technology, we've increased the complexity of it. More and more, we're seeing interdependencies now between previous sectors that didn't need to worry about one another. So for example, a good example is the automotive and the energy sector. Previously, they've lived in splendid isolation. Nobody's really worried about it. But as electric vehicles move on and we end up with 20 million or so of them ultimately, there's simply not going to be enough energy in the system to be able to support that long term without a lot more smartness being built into the grid, a lot more ways of dealing with how you actually charge for that electricity in the monetary sense, not in the electricity sense. And all of that is setting up interdependencies between these previously separated operational technology systems. And that for me is a real concern, because what we have to look at is, yes, there are huge benefits from doing that, and we absolutely need to do that for the environment, for the way that the country needs to work in the future. But what we also have to do is work out, how do we make those things resilient? Because, if ever you need any evidence, it's from the Ukraine, it's from world events, it's from everything that's going on. And, people are now targeting that operational technology that runs CNI, critical national infrastructure, very specifically. So what can we do? I think for me, it's firstly about, understanding what is resilience and how do you know when you've made something resilient enough? It's a really, really challenging sort of research space that we're working with a number of partners, including Cardiff University, in terms of, how much is enough? How do you actually measure resilience in a really, really complex cyber-physical system that has safety at its heart? And then ultimately, how do you prove in a court of law that you've actually done enough to be able to make a safety claim against that operational technology? And as we see the fusion of all these different sectors and the complexity going through the roof, you can't protect everything. So you're going to have to rely on these resilience arguments at some level. And frankly, we're not there yet in the operational technology world, and we need to get there as quickly as we can. It's not all doom and gloom. We do have some really interesting research programs just up the road in Ebbw Vale, where we're really trying to wrestle some of these problems to the ground. But, this session is all about, from crisis to opportunity and how can we bounce back? It's bouncing back. And yes, we've got the technology there, the automation, but we also need to look at how that affects the safety side of things and the resilience side of things as well.
Wow, fascinating. And as you said, the next bit is cyber technology, and actually it's what we're hearing is a lot about people and process. It's not all about technology, and resilience being linked to interdependencies and people and processes. And so we're hearing that from an industry perspective. But Stephen, if I may, I'll come to you. Obviously, you've got a background in defence and security, and looking at it from a nation perspective now. We've heard a lot about collaboration and preparedness. If you would share your views on that, I'd be fascinated, please.
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Peter. Firstly, can I thank Wales Tech Week and the Welsh Government for inviting me to Tech Week and for facilitating my visit. As you said, I'm the Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and representative of the Australian Government. And the Australian Government and the Australian High Commission think there's real opportunities for greater economic relationship between Australia and Wales. And we see a real opportunity in innovation in IT and in cybersecurity. So that's the main purpose for being here. As you've indicated, I've had sort of experience in government. Firstly, I think that it's worth making the point that Sarah's presentation was really a comprehensive and up-to-date version of the threat assessment as we see it, both state actors and non-state actors, but also moving into areas that for governments and for nation states are critically important. Firstly, disinformation and propaganda and influence is a real problem for us now. And secondly, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. And you don't have to be in a state of conflict or a state of war for critical pieces of infrastructure to be under attack on a daily basis. In terms of Australia, for the last half dozen years or so, we've been focusing on activity which is aimed at protecting critical infrastructure so far as the Australian government is concerned. And so we've now passed legislation which puts greater obligations on the owners and operators of critical infrastructure, which is designated and prescribed by the government, to make sure they've got very high levels of cyber hygiene. And that's caused us to do a couple of things as a follow-on from that. If you look at the historical relationship between Australia and the United Kingdom, culture, history, like-mindedness, but for the last, for the post-World War II years, our relationship has really been economic, which is direct foreign investment by the UK into Australia in particular, but also strategic security intelligence. And on the intelligence side, the closest relationship that we have is Australia's once Defence Signals Directorate, now Australian Signals Directorate, and GCHQ. And so what was once SIGINT, now Cyber, there's a really close relationship there. When I was Defence Minister, I changed the name of Defence Signals Directorate to Australian Signals Directorate because we could see that this was going to be a challenge, not just for defence, but a whole of government challenge, a whole of nation challenge, and an industry challenge. So, of course, GCHQ and the ASD are highly effective organisations, world class. But if you want to protect your economy and protect your society from cyber attack, you've got to have a competent and capable cybersecurity industry. And so it's all well and good for us to say, look, ASD or GCHQ, they can protect the government crown jewels. But that doesn't necessarily mean that for the average punter, for the ordinary civilian, or for the ordinary small or medium or large organisation, that the government can provide the protection that's required. So we have to grow and develop a capable and competent domestic jurisdiction cybersecurity industry. And we've been working very hard to do that, particularly as has been said, in the operational technology and protection of critical infrastructure and assets of strategic importance is concerned. One of the real points that Sarah made, I think, without expressly saying it, is we're in a growth business. You know, cybersecurity attacks are not going to relent. It's going to become an ongoing feature of straitened strategic circumstances and strategic competition. We live in a multipolar world, and so that means like-minded nations have to be acting together. And so the notion of Australia and the UK working together, government to government, cyber security agency to cyber security agency, cyber industries and innovation and technology and fintech industries to industry, this is going to be something which will make a very helpful contribution to protecting our citizens, protecting our economies. It also, because cyber security attacks are not going away and we're in a growth business, it opens up opportunities and potential. So there is enormous potential for Welsh cybersecurity companies to be working hand in hand with Australian cybersecurity companies, but enormous potential to grow. And when you look at the sorts of focus of governments now, yes, it's critical infrastructure, but it's also the sanctity and surety of supply chain. So Thales, for example, is a defence supplier in Australia. We're not so much worried about Thales as we are about Thales' supply chain. And so one of the modern challenges for the MOD, for Australian Defence, for any like-minded defence organisation is sanctity and surety of supply chains. That can't be done only by government. It can only be done with industry assistance and governments working hand in hand with their industries. But because we're in a trilateral technology partnership, AUKUS, UK, US and Australia, part of which is forward-leaning technologies and advanced technologies. Cybersecurity is one of those. So there's opportunities for us to be working together with the United States to grow both national security protection but also national economic opportunities. So from my perspective, I haven't been to Wales for 40 years. Last time I came, like a lot of Welsh people, I did the pilgrimage to David Lloyd George's grave. So I'm very pleased to be back, but there couldn't be a better time for an Australian High Commissioner to be in Wales with the challenges that we have in the technology and cyber front, but also with the opportunities, both opportunities to work together, government and industry, but also opportunities for small and medium-sized technology companies to make a really substantial contribution to national security, but also to their own economic prosperity, but also to national economic prosperity.
Wow, fantastic insights. We're really lucky to hear those. Thanks ever so much. Before we go to the audience for questions, I was going to come back to you, Sarah. So you've given us your insights, but I'm sure you've got other thoughts or anything else you wanted to reflect on based on the discussion or based on outside of your slides. I'll give you a few minutes.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to make a comment. I was moderating a conference a few weeks ago on behalf of Lloyd's of London and Aon, and in particular with regards to cyber insurance and systemic risk. And I just kind of reflecting on what we were just talking about there, the scope and scale. And so one of the things they were talking about was really that issues of supply chain attacks. And as I kind of commented on, as we've just reflected on the panel, they're kind of attacks in critical infrastructure in particular. And in essence, what we're kind of seeing is that kind of extension, if you like, from just attacking a bank to attacking banking infrastructure, same as energy infrastructure and kind of all of those as well. So I think there are multiple industry discussions with government and big tech and all these things about locking in essence. And I see a real value in action that I just wanted to share as well. And again, reflecting back on Ukraine and kind of the build up to that. So historically, Microsoft would have shared a lot of this threat intelligence that I'm talking about with other intelligence agencies, government, etc. Microsoft made the decision very early on to put this information into the public domain. And really the reason was twofold, because it's the difference between having a strategy in peacetime versus wartime. So a lot of public sector entities in particular, we have laws which basically have requirements for data sovereignty, data residency, particularly public sector, a lot of critical infrastructure. Data must reside in a specific country or a specific region, which is great in peacetime when you need the data as quickly, as near as you as possible. For Ukraine in particular, it dawned on them when they had 190,000 Russian troops kind of massing on their border, that they have old Soviet infrastructure, a lot of kind of on-premise data centers, and they had to move, and they had to move very quickly. So they actually changed the law the week before the physical invasion, which enabled them to actually not just move the data, but move the data out of country as well. And that's kind of been a real reflection. We're seeing a lot of changes. And it's not going to be a quick change, but we are seeing that, like, regulators and different government entities really kind of having to think kind of that systemic risk. We're not just talking about our company or our sector. We're talking about a nation level or multi-nation level. And I think the real benefit, as I sort of said, not just about getting this information into the public domain, but the locking in of multiple different entities together, sharing intelligence at a level we've never seen before, is a massive game changer. And you might not see a lot of this stuff happening, but the fact that this is going on is really kind of testament, I think, to kind of what we're going to be seeing going forward. But highly disruptive. I mean, it's not going to stop, as you sort of said, but where there's a will, there's a way for a lot of the different attackers. But the level of disruption that's going on across that kind of industry is huge.
Fantastic. Well, it's certainly not boring, is it? It's going to keep us in shop for a while. So thank you very much. I promised you some opportunity for questions. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll probably take one or two questions from the floor if there are any. There's a roving mic at the back. Any hands? Otherwise, I get to ask my question. Yeah, there's one there, right at the back. I'll just say your name and where you're from as well, please.
Oh, hi, thanks. Nick Miller Research. I just wondered, going back, Sarah, to your conversation about interference, I just wonder how you feel about the electoral process in Britain at the moment and the extent to what we might see electoral interference in the next election when it comes up.
I think this is the danger, as we sort of said, we're seeing a real willingness for actors not just to go from disruption to destruction as well. Particularly with a number of nations where they don't care if you know. In fact, that they've been quite happy to know that you know that they're there. And I think this really brings to home what we were talking about with critical infrastructure. But I think from a cybersecurity perspective in particular, and again, we're kind of reflecting on what Philomena was saying, we need to also be very cognizant about what really we're here to protect. As much as we talk about protecting infrastructure, we really are here to protect people. People first, always, is kind of one of my mottos, in essence. And I think that's where we kind of have to kind of think about the humanitarian crisis that's happening, and the impact goes beyond kind of much bigger than kind of what we anticipated. But I think that we need to be really mindful about, ultimately, where could this go to, but also collectively, again, what can we do to protect people at all levels?
I kind of wish you had a room full of school kids listening to this panel, because it's so inspirational. I definitely want to do cyber as a career. It sounds awesome. Was there anyone else who wanted to reflect on that before I ask if there's any other questions?
I think the only point I'd make is the kind of the social engineering and the social psychology element of it, because you don't have to actually attack anything to have an effect. And particularly with elections, if you throw enough noise out there, some of it's going to stick. And I think that's the sort of thing that we also need to be mindful of as we're going into an election sort of season, if you like. Because you don't actually have to do anything really tremendously exciting. You just have to put a load of noise out there, and it can have a social influence and a social impact.
Absolutely. Stephen, you want to...
Well, in the modern digital world where it's free to create a platform, whereas historically you'd need to have capital and regulatory arrangements to start a TV station or a newspaper or a radio station, now anyone can create a platform. So there's a much more of a tendency, which I think is regrettable in the modern era, for people to stick to their siloed digital platforms. And if you can influence one of those silos and becomes an echo chamber, then it's very easy to disaggregate societal thought. So attacks upon democracy, attacks upon electoral systems are real and dangerous. And this is not in any way to disagree with what Sarah said, but you can attack humans and you can attack civil society in a number of ways, one of which is to turn off water, turn off energy, turn off power, lock down all living arrangements, and immediately you have a civil disorder and civil society crisis. So there's one or two ways of, there's more than one way of skinning a cat if your ambition is to destroy a society or parts thereof.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show the importance of psychology in this as well, and cybersecurity, certainly not technology alone. It involves lots of different things, but economics as well, but psychology is such a huge part of this and the study of that as well. So I was going to ask another question, but I'm conscious there's another panel and we're already a couple of minutes over now, so I'm going to have to pause it there. But I believe the panelists are going to stay around for at least for a short while. And I would like to personally thank all of you for your insightful comments and for coming so far as well. And hope to see you again soon. Audience, would you join me in thanking the panelists, please? Thank you very much.
I spent 20 years in the cybersecurity industry. I worked for a company called Symantec, and I've just had deja vu to the most extraordinary degree. Super insightful. Thank you all very, very, very much indeed. Luckily, we've got 5 minutes, and then we're going to turn our attention to 5G and 6G. You can see how this is all progressing very logically. So if you can stay, we'd love you to stay. Just stand up and feel a bit better, but we'll be starting again in about 5 minutes. Thank you all very much indeed.